And you got it tuned to K-Mud. This is Chi Talks with Javi and Nona. Our guest today is our friend Donnie. And so welcome to the show where it's all about the energy. And if everything is made of energy, then we have a lot to discuss. So we'll dive right in. And you want to give us a little synopsis of what we have today?
Sure. This is quite a show that we've got planned. Our friend Donnie and Javi and myself enter a lot of discussions around health and energy and the self. And we just thought it would be really great to have everyone listen out there join in on one of our conversations. So that's pretty much what's going to happen. But I'm also really it's going to culminate into a point of talking about the perineural system. So I'm really excited to meander on our conversational path to get to that point about healing in the body and the wonderful perineural system that basically, we'll get to it.
We'll get to it. Yeah.
So, let's start with a little breathing exercise.
That's right. Yeah. Thanks for putting us on track. Okay. So we'll take a few moments to get into that Qigong state, get into that theta state, using the breath as a strategy to down-regulate if need be. So you can put your mental focus on your abdomen. Some people like to put it on the perineum. Some people just need a quick sigh of relief and release. Whatever suits you, you can do that at this moment. So I'm going to take a deep breath inhale. And I'll exhale at the mouth. Feel a sense of calming, relaxation, and releasing on my exhale. And you can join us. Let's do a few more. Inhale deeply through the nose. Another sigh. We've introduced the sound. You might feel that resonate in your chest and your heart area. Let's do one last one. Excellent. So I hope you have a sense of calming, sense of release, down-regulate, if you will, heart rate coming down. And I think we'll introduce Donnie at this moment. We'll talk about down-regulating. Let's talk about breathing. And Donnie always helps us to connect the science to, I think, the experience. So if you can tell us a little bit about what brought you into Qigong, your experience with Qigong, and then maybe down-regulating.
Welcome, Donnie.
Welcome. Thanks for being here, man.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for having me. How are you two this morning?
Pretty good. I'm just trying to get everything settled. So a little flustering, but it's nice to come down and sit by the fire like this. And
thank you so much for coming over to my cabin. I think what you're implying is about activation of the vagus nerve and turning on the parasympathetic nervous system when you said down-regulated. Is that what you were referring to? Yes,
absolutely.
And so when we do diaphragmatic breathing, we actually activate one of our nerves in our body called the vagus nerve, which turns on all these processes in our bodies that are the opposite of stress. So if you were in a college-level biochemistry class, somebody might tell you that the sympathetic nervous system stands for fight or flight. You're going to get in a fight with somebody. You're going to run away from a scary situation like a tiger coming after you. And that the parasympathetic nervous system is called the feed and breathe. So when you're doing things that you enjoy, digesting your food or the other thing that we all enjoy, you get very relaxed. And these turn on physiological processes in the body that have been well understood by Western science for numerous decades.
Thanks, Donnie. I just want to say welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here and agreeing to be on our show. And I'm really excited to get into just like some natural conversation flow here also. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background, a little bit of history, or how did you come, actually, I think the question is, to energy and Qi? How did you find yourself connecting to the concept?
Thank you again for having me, Nona. I was very fortunate in life and happened to find myself at the Mayo Clinic in 2018 working on an independent research project that had gotten picked up by the Mayo Clinic. And I was heavily steeped in Western science and Western medicine. And my middle sister, Carla, whom I love greatly, she contacted me and said that she had had some amazing experiences with somebody who had done Reiki. And at the ego and everything that I was doing in the Western world, and thought to myself that my sister was being taken advantage of. And the first chance I had, I would get back to see her. I would go see this person who was giving her Reiki and figure out how she was tricking my sister, essentially. That's not what happened. When I went and saw the person that my sister was referring to, I had some very, very, I would call one of the experiences with her life-changing. I think her second visit was just really blew me away what she could do with her hands without touching me. And I worked as a health coach and then a medical researcher, and then later on as a healthcare consultant. And one of my clients in the past had given me this book called Energy Medicine by a James Oshman, PhD. And this gentleman had put together all of the research from Western medicine and Western medicine thinking. So when I use the term Western medicine, I mean empirical science that comes down from Newton, Galileo, in that sense, what we call observational science. And he had put together all the studies referring to energy. So studies on Qigong, studies on Reiki, studies where they use spectrometers to measure the actual waves, the literal waves that come out of people's hands. And as I started to read that research, I then said, enough of this Western stuff. I want to go away and try out some of this Eastern stuff, maybe see what that's about. So I went to Cambodia, ended up training with a Qigong professional there, and started pulling Qi out of the earth and circulating around my body.
What was that experience like for you? When did you start feeling that energy? Tell us about this Cambodian experience.
Yeah, so again, my brain is like very analytical. I really, really enjoy research. I'm really into molecular biology, and I like it when my mind can put things together. So I've had somebody tell me one time, they're like, I think that you have a very high IQ, but I think your emotional IQ is 0. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what people were talking about sometimes when they were talking about feelings, because my brain would just be constantly processing, like, well, how does the molecular biology fit into what I'm feeling right now? You know, this is just attraction. This isn't really love or things like that. So I definitely had a hard time feeling, I would say. And as I started to work with this Qigong practitioner, you know, at first, I don't know how to explain it. You all of a sudden wake up to the idea that reality is not just what your mind is thinking. And you learn how to completely turn off your mind, or actually come to observe your mind and detach from it completely. And this is what goes into, like, some mystics refer to as like the capital I versus the little me. I would say that was the first thing I experienced, was like the I amness of myself, if you will, while I was sitting there doing Qigong in this park for 3 hours, like staring at this tree with this very regimented person telling me to do the same exercise over and over again. I just kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And then right after that, I started to feel things in my body. I started to literally feel the transfer of energy. And before I knew it, I could feel the transfer of energy into my feet from the earth, which is heavily researched. I actually knew a lot about this research because I had a skydiving accident in 2012. And part of my recovery was using what they call earthing mats, which are mats that plug into the grounding port of your home if your home is wired correctly. and it connects you to the earth. And these were used by Lance Armstrong historically in his Tour de France wins. A lot of good science behind this. A lot of people think Lance just won the Tour de France's because of drugs, but in actuality, like, you wouldn't want any, if you actually knew what the Tour de France entailed, you wouldn't want anyone to do that race, first of all, without drugs, because it's inhuman. But with that being said, Lance had an amazing training regimen, but still had all kinds of different injuries, and he used earthing pads. And so what I'm meant to say is that there's a lot of Western science on the power of earthing. So when I started to realize that my bare feet were on the ground while I was doing Qigong, and I could start to feel the energy come up into my body and then circulate through networks, you know, as soon as I had the experience of detaching from my mind and then feeling these different things inside my body, then I really started to dive into the research on the epigenetics of all this. And, you know, I just kind of ran with it from there. But I would say that was like those two things were the biggest things I learned.
Wow, the I am a part of that journey. That's like, I am what I am is in a lot of spiritual traditions, right? So you talked before about waking up to programming in relationship to this. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, in reference to the I amness, you know, it's like coming on your radio show today. You know, I love you both, but there is like a nervousness there inside me. And in the past, I would say that I would refer to myself and say, I am nervous. And I am certainly not nervous. The verb to be, like the all-encompassing, you know, some people would call it the soul, is not nervous. You know, you can see this with like whenever you meet somebody on a first or second date that you really like, and you're like, oh, I really like this person. It's like, give it a few dates, you know, so you can say like, I is feeling nervous, or, but you never say that I am anything. So when you start to detach from that programming, you start to realize how you are robbing yourself from seeing reality the way it actually is, because your mind has been programmed and conditioned to see reality through a certain lens. So for example, today it's raining, it's a little chilly outside. There are some people that would say to themselves, because it's rainy and chilly, well, they wouldn't say this to themselves, but what's going on in their subconscious is that because it's rainy and chilly, I then must feel gloomy. And then when you wake up to reality and you realize that rain and the cold are just as great as dry and heat. They're all great. Reality is amazing. And I know that there are numerous other organisms out there right now in the redwoods that are very happy that we're having rain right now. And we need more rain. So when all of a sudden you make up something like, oh, the day is gloomy, or I'm in a bad mood, it's completely nonsensical. Your brain is literally just making something up. And this comes from programming that we all receive. You know, there's something I know, Nona, you grew up eating natto, right? Did I pronounce that correctly? Natto, yeah. And you think it's delicious, right? Oh, totally. I might taste natto and be like, this is disgusting. Now, is either person right or wrong? No, it's just different programming. We just react to it differently. So when it comes to like waking up to that idea and coming into reality, knowing your I amness allows you to see the present moment and people in this present moment. And I think that's what allows you to be able to love.
One thing you mentioned in our previous talks was, how can you know Jesus, or how can you know Buddha without knowing oneself? How do you know you know?
Yeah, I think this is what when you refer to when we talk about understanding. I saw this at the when I was doing my research study with the Mayo Clinic. Is that I just want to back up right here and talk about understanding. Is that I work with kids with rare genetic disorders, and what science finds out is that for everyone who doesn't know, science only knows as much as it knows today, and then tomorrow we learn something new. There's a great book called The Half-Life of Facts that explains all this, that there is no fact that lasts forever. So for 3,000 years, people could be looking at each other and saying like, hey, did you know that the sun rises and the sun sets? And one person could be sitting there being like, no, the sun doesn't rise and the sun doesn't set. And everyone looks at him like they're crazy. And then one day somebody blasts a rocket off the earth and you realize, oh, the sun doesn't actually rise or set. There's this orbit and a spinning of the earth, and we have a wobble, and there's all these other things going on. So that's going on in science. So in the 1980s and 1990s, we used to tell new mothers, we have this condition called SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. And we would tell new mothers, I think in the 80s, we said, your kid needs to lie on their back. If the kid doesn't lie on their back, they'll die of SIDS. And then we tell mothers in the 90s, we're like, oh, change that up. Kids need to sleep on their stomach. I might have those two backwards, but you get what I'm saying. Like, nobody actually knows what they're talking about, but we're doing the best we can, right? So we put all these kids on this umbrella called SIDS. Well, now what we're finding out as molecular biology and electron microscopes get better and better and better is that every now and then a kid comes out 1 in 5 billion, I mean, extremely rare, with a rare genetic disorder. And that's the real reason it died. It just happened to fall under the umbrella of SIDS because nobody knew that that was there. So when we think about understanding, this goes into this field of, it's a major question in research about, and again, I don't mean to sound, forgive me what I'm about to say, but this is a major question in research, is how much time and effort do we put towards keeping somebody alive who really doesn't have a good chance in this world in the first place, just from a genetic disorder standpoint. And there are people out there who are very, very strongly like, do not keep these kids alive. It's not fair to them. And then there are people out there that are very strongly like, no, you keep all these kids alive. Well, what I saw in that group of people is that there are people there with 8 and 12 years of education, MDs and PhDs. And they think they understand all these other things in the world, but they don't even understand who they are. And you can observe it in their behavior. Like, I observe it in my own behavior. Like, I don't even know who I am. So how could I possibly understand anything else in this world? So some of the way that like speakers say it, like I would call them enlightened beings or whoever you want to, this is just the way they say it. They're like, you think you understand who God is, or you think you understand Buddha, or you think you understand Jesus, but you don't even understand yourself. How do you know that you understand all of those other things correctly when you don't even understand yourself? You know, I think one of the ones we talked about the other day was that my father he did not have an easy childhood, and my childhood was not as bad as his, but he definitely brought over some of his childhood into my childhood. And when I first got the position at the Mayo, at that time I had I think 8 college classes under my belt. And I got asked by, there was multiple doctors in a room, PhD, MDs. They asked me to come on board with no education training or anything, right? And I was blown away. I couldn't believe that happened. You know, I couldn't believe that I was like, you gotta be kidding me. And when I called my dad to tell him, the first thing out of his mouth was, how much money are you getting paid? There was nothing there to be about like, wow, that's amazing or any of that. He was coming out of his programming of what he went through in his childhood. And he couldn't see reality in that present moment. You know, he didn't have an understanding of himself, so he couldn't even understand the situation I was explaining to him. And then me at that time, because I didn't have understanding of myself, when my father said that to me, I, of course, have a reaction inside where it's like, man, what is this dude's problem? You know, I all of a sudden have this anger, resentment that I've dealt with for all these years, when all of a sudden, when I understand myself, which is that like I went through some kind of maybe traumatic experiences with my father early on in childhood, but they're not real anymore. Me and my dad are like great friends. Like when you come, we have times all the time we're playing basketball together, we're laughing hysterically. So now that I understand that, you know, now when my dad says things to me like that, there's an understanding there. You know, I can actually be like, oh, you know, in my head, I'm like, oh, I'm not going to identify with that. Like, I love my dad. I know my dad is worried about money because his dad lost all of his money and they went through a wild situation that was very traumatic for him. So I don't know if we got off topic there, but.
No, that's great. That's great. I appreciate that. I want to take a moment to remind listeners you got to tune to K-Mud, and you're listening to Chi Talks with Javi and Nona, and our guest today is our friend Donnie, breaking down how do you know what you know. And if you know something, where does that knowing come from? And what is your personal programming? How well do you know yourself? And I would say that this connects to Qigong, very much so. And the word nature Gong Fu comes to mind, which translates as internal Gong Fu. And if we translate Gong Fu as skill and time and energy, or time and energy to cultivate a skill, then internal Gong Fu points to the cultivating of knowing yourself as a skill. Nature Gong Fu. So,
and I would say too, is knowing yourself as energy. I mean, to me, that's what Qigong Gong Fu introduced me to, was like, oh, I am energy. And this ties in with physics when we find out that like over half the universe is made up of dark matter. This matter that we can't even perceive. We can't see it, feel it, hear it, taste it, smell it, touch it. We have nothing that can measure it, but we know it's there mathematically. You know, it's like there's something there. This is what we get into Higgs boson. Oh, we don't have to go down that road, but there's
CERN.
Yeah, at the CERN laboratories, there's something there appearing out of nowhere. You know, for listeners out there, if you look up the Higgs boson, help me out, Javi. Higgs boson molecule particle, on Wikipedia, it will tell you that it appears from the vacuum of space. That's the way we currently define it. So I think the Gong Fu or Qigong, whatever practice you're using, meditation, Tai Chi, a lot of different practices out there, yoga, they introduce you to that there's all of these things happening in your body at every second of the day. And so if your mind is just running things all day long and you're ignoring that whole side of it, then yes, there's a big part of you that you don't know. And how are you going to understand this life in this world if there's a big part of you going on that you don't even know because you don't even feel it?
And you're saying that Qigong awakened you to, let's say, another part of reality, another part of you, and from there started to, and then you started to pose the question, well, who am I and what am I as well? And we talked about also my previous experience and the first time that I felt energy between my hands, and it was some sort of an experience that solidified some sort of belief that I had but had never experienced. So at that time, in that moment, I can remember the room. I remember the people there. It was one of those significant experiences in my life. And which brought me to California, training with Dr. Yang. We wouldn't be here right now, probably, or something, how that happens. So the feeling and the experience of energy, if you can find someone, I would say, who can lead you to that experience, definitely seek that out.
And I don't think you necessarily have to find somebody. There are a lot of people that get there without anyone, I think. And it just involves sitting still. If you can actually stop and sit still and just let the mind shut up.
So, it's all about that experience, right? I think we've talked about it before, that we have understanding that we get through the knowing process, the studying and all that. But then we're talking right now about the experience, the experience itself, and knowing that comes from that experience, that unique experience that you have, either energy or whatever else life brings you.
Yeah, I'd love to comment on that, Nona. Thank you for bringing that part up, because that gets into beliefs, and there have been amazing studies on brainwashing that it's wild how much research there is on this. But if you find yourself reacting to somebody else emotionally when they disagree with your opinion, it's not a 100% sign, but it's a good sign that you've probably been brainwashed into that opinion. And the difference is that when you have a belief in something and you experience something. So I had a belief before I ever saw the Reiki person that Reiki was trash. Like anyone who does Reiki healer is just not worthy of my time. I'm doing Western ego, right? And if someone were to come up to me and have a difference of opinion and say, well, I think your sister's experience might be valid, which is a completely normal thing for someone to say, by the way, I would sit there and be like, oh, how dare you? I'm going to get emotional because it's just a belief, As soon as I felt Reiki and experienced it, Now, if someone comes up to me and goes, I think, let's say I go see some of my old associates at the Mayo. They're like, hey, how'd your whole Reiki thing turn out? I'm like, man, Reiki is amazing. Had a great experience. Could feel the person's energy. And they're like, well, I just don't believe in it. I don't have an emotional reaction. I'm like, oh, great. Because I've experienced it. It's very, very different than belief. Very different than belief. Sorry, no, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but
no, that's awesome. Definitely good to talk about these words, right? These fine differences between knowledge and belief and experience. But and then we'll get into a little bit about the intersect of experience and science in a little bit here. I want to chase that path on the experience road. But I also want to ask the question of, okay, so if this exploration of truth or yourself is based on experience, then I would venture to say that your experiences then can either open your world or limit that world. And so it leads me to the question of, if that is true, then it would lead me to the question of, how do we move towards expanding our experiences or inviting new experiences in?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And again, for anyone out there listening, I know nothing, okay? But this is the best I've been able to piece together. So I think experience is the first step. So first you have to start experiencing it, but then the next step is actually dropping your attachments to experiences. So if you have had a bad experience in the past that keeps you from doing things in the future, that means that you're not open to the present moment. I did a bad job saying that. I think what I want to say about that is, when we go through these experiences, they allow us to feel these different things that wake us up to what I would call truth. Instead of knowing something, now you've experienced it and felt it, whether it's good or bad. I think your next step after that is to realize that everything that happens to you in your life is for the good. Now, this is a very, very difficult thing for people to go through. And I'm just going to run through things here real quick. We don't have to get into specifics, but when I was 4, my brother died at the age of 7. In 2005, I walked on top of an IED in Iraq, and I lost part of my cerebellum in my brain. I was in the United States Army Airborne Ranger Special Forces. I actually just found out last night I had another buddy overdose. I had a lot of friends go through suicide after the war. I respect people when they say that experiences were bad in the past. I know what you're getting at, but the important part is not to attach to it, because those experiences aren't happening right now. That's the difference, is that once you start having the experiences, then you wake up to the fact of, like, I don't have to attach to this experience, because life is now. Now. This present moment, this present moment, this present moment, this present moment. So when we hear these different stories from these mystics in the past, like Bodhi, I'm not going to say his name right, but for short, Bodhi, he's like the second or third Buddha maybe. He gets punched in the face. So this gentleman stares at a cave wall for 9 years straight, and then becomes enlightened and walks around and does things. Like, the stories that are told about him are very similar to the stories that are told about Jesus in the Bible. And he has a military general at the time that was just very angry with the way he acted and went about his life, because he just doesn't care. He's just completely free. That he punched Bodhi in the face, and Bodhi lost like 3 of his teeth. And Bodhi immediately came into that next present moment and showed that general love and moved away. And I think that's what Jesus is talking about when he talks turn the other cheek. You know, I could look at my dad in the past and attach to all those past experiences I could have with him, you know, and say to myself, every time I get around him, this guy has, my dad's punched me in the face. And I can be like, this guy's on this, and this guy's on this, and this guy's on this. And I carry that into the present moment. And then all of a sudden, now my dad and I can't laugh and play basketball together because I'm attached to the moments in the past. When you just drop your attachments and just take the experiences for what they are, that is when life really starts to open up. The only way I know, I do not know good words for this. Sometimes I call it surfing. I call it surfing through life. Other people refer to it as moving with the Tao, or the Wu Wei, the act of non-doing, I believe. Did I say that right? Where you all of a sudden, you stop trying. I can't tell you how many times now in my professional life where as soon as things get hard, I go, stop. You are trying much, much too hard for this. If this was actually supposed to work out, this naturally would work together. It would happen synergistically. And I take a pause and I meditate. And you know what happens is that it just works itself out. I test this out every now and then with like transportation. Like if I need to ride somewhere, I just refuse to get in contact with anyone about it. Like in the past, I used to be this kind of person who's very regimented, like get your rental car, we're going to be here at this time, going to have my Uber at this time, very like disciplined, regimented time thing like this. Now I've kind of turned into this person who's more like, hey, what's going on today? What's open? And I find out that sometimes it'll be the day of that I need the ride and I still haven't worked out a ride. And I'll randomly have a friend hit me up and be like, hey, man, I'm going down the road to Miranda Market. And I'm like, oh, can I get to ride with you to Garberville or something? It's like, yeah, too easy, So.
Wow, it's very interesting. Thank you for sharing all of the personal experiences, tying in your personal story. It's 9:33 right now, and you got it tuned to K-Mud, your voice in the Redwoods. And I'm Javi with Nona. We got our friend Donnie here. We're doing Chi Talks. And we're talking about personal programming. And you just spoke a lot about attachments and how if you stick with your attachments and lose sight of the present now currently unfolding, then you're not experiencing reality as it is there for you to experience.
Right.
So it was interesting because we just talked about programming, and then I saw as you unfolded your story, you talked about attachments, and attachments seem to be programming that your brain is holding on to, whether you're aware of it or not. And so you talk a lot about awareness and awakening as well. You wanna dive into awareness now?
Yeah. I think that was a great explanation you just gave there. That's what awareness is waking up to that programming. Waking up to that programming. I mean, back when so my dad and I parted ways in high school, not on good terms. It was just like, all right, dude, you do you, I'll do me. And I went off to the military. And really my military experience was about proving to him like ego. So, and during that time in my life, when anytime my dad would try to reach out to me or get a call to me, I immediately would ramp it up to 100. I'd be like, oh, I hope he starts an argument because I want it. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's handle this now. Because now now you're thinking to yourself, now I'm much more capable. I'm not a kid anymore. And you start thinking about things that way. And what happens is that the dad on the other hand is getting older. I think as people start to get older and they start to have health problems, you start to see this. You start to see maybe people that you've always thought were like unkind or angry, like they go through a serious health event and then all of a sudden they're very just like kind and loving. You're like, what happened there? Well, they're starting to realize that one of the things that I think we tend to forget in society is that we all have this in common. We're all going to die, with the few exceptions of the people that rainbow body themselves, but we don't have to get into that. Taoists and Buddhists out there. Mm-hmm. So that person, when they're reaching out to you, let's say you hold a grudge against somebody, that person, in Buddhism, they say holding a grudge against somebody else is like holding a hot coal in your own hand. You're only hurting yourself. So let's say the other person's reaching out to you for reconciliation, but because you're holding onto that hot coal of a grudge so tightly, you won't even pick up the phone. So right there, you're robbing yourself of that present moment. Now, for people out there that are like, well, I've been through the same repeated patterns over and over again with this person, I don't think it's going to change. Well, then what the situation transitions to is that instead of you responding out of anger, now you're able to, as they say in the Bhagavad, can you say that word?
Bhagavad Gita.
Thank you. I never say it right. It says something to the effect of like, it's set up as like a battlefield. It says something to the effect of like, before diving into battle, place your heart at the lotus feet of the Lord. It's like you placing your heart at peace. So then it's like, if I'm going to now go into action, let's say I'm working with somebody on a research project and they keep missing deadlines for the paper that we have to publish over and over and over again. In the past, I would get all ramped up, angry, my like PTSD kicks in, all the old wartime Donnie, start cursing, and that's how I approach that person. And that person gets like, they're like, whoa, they get blown out of the water. They haven't been through my war experiences, like all these other things. They're like, you are a different person. That's when HR gets involved. I'm like, oh man, I gotta calm down. I gotta go meditate now. Sir. But now it's like, if somebody isn't meeting deadlines, for example, then I stop and go, wait, I need to leave my heart at peace. I remove my heart from the situation. I unattach. I go, I'm at peace. This is perfectly fine. I have no idea what's going on in this person's life. You look at the person, you say, hey, I love you greatly. It's been great working with you, but because you haven't been able to meet the deadlines, we can't have you on this paper anymore. Is there anything else I can do for you? That comes from honest love. And I found that when you approach situations like that, then all of a sudden people respond very differently, very differently. You start working through things. You come up with solutions. It's not just this cut and dry, this is over. So very matter of factly. I keep forgetting all the questions.
Awareness.
I'm going on tangents.
Yeah, no, it's great. Awareness.
So awareness is like watching yourself in certain situations and, understanding what your mind is doing. I had a friend of mine who it's a little personal, but he was upset with his significant other, and he was holding all of these grudges against his significant other. And whenever his significant other would, when they would separate, he would call me and say, can you believe she's done X, Y, and Z? And the more we started to talk, I was like, oh, so, well, what have you been doing since, you got this time by yourself? What have you been doing by yourself? Well, it turns out that all of these issues that my friend thought that his partner was doing to him that were self-destructive. So his partner, he thought, was doing these things that were very, very hurtful to him. And she therefore said, well, since you think that about my behavior, you go be by yourself for a while. So now that he's by himself, I'm like, great. This is like in my head, because the present moment is like, wow, you get to be by yourself, like being by yourself. Oh man, don't tease me with a good time. It's like, and I'm like, what have you been doing with your time? You know what you've been doing with this time? All self-destructive behaviors, staying up till 3. I mean, I'm not judging or criticizing. This is for this specific person. For this specific person, these were self-destructive behaviors. He was staying up very, very late at night, watching incredibly like violent things on TV while drinking on a daily basis. And I was like, so you just got really angry at this other person, and then you were unaware that you're doing that same thing to yourself. Therefore, you are now angry at yourself. Now you hate yourself. And I had to wake up to that, how much I hated myself and how much of my actions were coming out of the fact that I didn't like who I actually was. So the beginning of awareness for me was just waking up to the fact that like some of the programming I got as a kid was that you should hate yourself because you're not good enough. I think we all get this. It's called conditional love. Our parents don't mean to do this, but I heard Aubrey Marcus share about this, the owner of On It. He was using ayahuasca with a shaman in South America, and he had these visions from when he was in middle school. He was a very good basketball player. So today, Aubrey Marcus is like this millionaire. He runs this amazing supplement company. It's called On It. And he went back to middle school when he's playing basketball, and he had one of his best games he had ever had. And he's scoring all these points. He's shooting threes, making layups, and you can hear his dad in the crowd like, "Whoa!" Like he's yelling out. He like, if you ever played sports, when you get in that flow state and people are egging you on and everything, it's just like, man, it just feels like you're living on top of the world. And when the buzzer hit, normally you walk over to your coach and you have like a little huddle, and then you shake hands with the other team. Well, before he even made it over to his team's huddle, his dad was out of the stands and being like, Aubrey, and like gives him this huge hug, right? And then, so he's under the influence of ayahuasca. He's with this shaman in South America. So that vision ends. And that wasn't a made up vision. That was actually from his past. So the next vision is another real life that happened from his past. So he had forgotten both of these things. And it was in high school, and it was like a tournament game. It's a little bit later in life, a little bit more serious, we'll say, because he's older. It's a tournament game, one and done kind of thing. If you lose, you're out. And he missed free throws with like 10 seconds left, and their team lost. And his dad didn't come out of the stands and give him a hug. And his dad barely even touched him after the game and was just like, hey, Aubrey, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Doesn't tell Aubrey that he doesn't do anything wrong. He's not telling Aubrey he doesn't love him. But right there, that's how we get programmed with conditional love. If you do this behavior, you get real big hugs. You do this behavior, you don't get the big hugs. And if you're not aware that you got that programming and you're going around life conditional, you're probably suffering. I would guess. That's how I was. I knew I was suffering. So awareness is about waking up to that programming, waking up to like, what's going on? Am I doing this because I hate myself? Am I doing this because I love myself? I used to get up every day at 5 a.m. And then after the military, I would still get up that early. And I realized at some point, I'm only getting up early because I don't like myself. Until I start to love myself, I'm not going to reincorporate this behavior anymore. And I've done that with everything, whether it's making my bed, all the things from the military. Until I can start loving myself in those ways, I'm not going to fall back on the discipline. I can love myself for exactly who I am. If who I am wants to sit on the couch and eat Cheetos and play video games, it's perfectly acceptable. And I love you, Don. And I think people need to go through days of having days like that where they're like, wow. And then, because then when you sit there and do those things that you think is loving yourself, then you kind of wake up to the fact of like, man, Cheetos make my stomach feel horrible. Then you're aware of that. Where in the past, it's like if I were to like eat emotionally, I wouldn't be thinking about how the eating I was doing was hurting me. I would only be thinking about the emotional issue. I'd be thinking about anger of my dad as I'm pounding a bag of Cheetos. And then as I'm like going through stomach cramps and having to use the bathroom late at night, I'm still thinking about anger towards my dad. I'm not aware. I'm not aware of what's actually happening. And awareness brings about understanding.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donnie. So, we're talking about the difference between knowledge, belief, experience, knowing oneself, and covering a lot. And, I'd love to take advantage of your science background also, though, Donnie, too, because I've always really, I really have respected the journey that you've taken because of the intensity of your experience and, the statistics coming out of the military and, the experiences that you share that your peers have gone through and the work you've done. Just the sheer work you've done to kind of make it through that in a different way. And so it really holds a lot of weight for me, when I hear your stories. And thank you for sharing that, open to sharing that on air. Really appreciate that. But yeah, I think we also talked about science and experience and how, okay, so now we're talking about individuals' experiences feeding into your own truth, the awareness allowing you to drop into the ultimate experience of what is happening in the now without dragging the past into it or even planning for the future. And so I just wanted to talk about when I have a love for science, and it comes from the idea that science is, if it's unadulterated, can be just a collective experience, right? That if you keep on staying in this awareness pattern and keep on allowing the past to be the past and being in the now, even with science, then you can allow science to be what it was meant to be and continually changing, right? You're talking about those facts that are no longer facts. So, but when I brought that up, you were really, you wanted to remind us that the science that we are experiencing today, maybe popularly, might not be that same science as the unadulterated science. Do you want to speak to that just for a moment? And then we'll move into the paraneural system. So
for sure,
just a couple of moments here.
For sure. So what you're referring to is empirical science or observational science. And there's a great gentleman, he's like one of the fathers of what we'd say modern day science, Dr. Karl Popper. He was alive at the turn of the 20th century, into the early 20th century. He observed two individuals. He observed Freud and he observed Einstein. And Freud, the famous psychologist, he would make a hypothesis. And again, I'm going to be a little bit off on this one, paraphrasing here, but Freud would say like, oh, you're having intimacy issues in life because your father didn't hug you enough as a child. And then as he would do his research and new data would come in, he would find people that were hugged too much by their parents, not too little, too much, and they had intimacy issues. So Freud would just change his hypothesis and be like, oh, well, you have intimacy issues if you don't get hugged enough or if you do get hugged too much. And Freud did that his whole career. And then Einstein comes in the door and comes up with E equals MC squared, and over again. I mean, we go through the Manhattan Project, we invent the nuclear bomb. He's always having conversations with Niels Bohr. He's always, every single time we turn around, E equals MC squared works out. It's always there. But until his last days, if you look at Einstein's life, he is still trying to disprove his theory. And this is what we call falsification. Okay, you're trying to falsify your hypotheses. You're never trying to verify your hypotheses. And as this plays out in modern day, what I'll say is that it is 1,000,000 times more valuable to doubt than it is to adore. Right now in society, we have all these people who just want to adore. They just want to look up to somebody. They want to find a guru, find somebody who thinks that they've arrived, and they just want to copy down whatever they said. Whether, so there's a lot of people that like to play on Team Blue, the Democrats, and anything that is said about Team Blue that's good, they're like, that's great. And everything that's said bad about Team Blue, they're like, that's wrong. And they're completely programmed. And there's a bunch of people out there that love to play on Team Red, Republican. And anything that's good for Team Red, they're like, that's great. Anything that's wrong for Team Red. There's no thinking going on. There's only verification of their hypothesis. There's no falsification of it whatsoever. True empirical science is falsification of your hypothesis. A scientist comes up with a hypothesis and then tries to falsify it. That's what you see in sciences like molecular biology. Well, actually, now it's getting crazy because of funding, because then you have verification bias come in, but that's a whole nother story. But yeah, that's empirical science about, and then it ties in with, are you actually taking in the data from the present moment? All facts have a half-life. So if matter of factly, your neighbor is the biggest jerk in the world, and they've been the biggest jerk for 45 years, and you walk out one day and he's like, hey neighbor, how you doing? You want a coffee? You can literally be like, wow, I just got new data. My neighbor is nice. Yes, I would like some coffee. And you go over there and have coffee with them.
Being in the moment. Being in the moment. That was good. That was a nice quick version of that, because I really, really do want to get to a little bit more science. And, just to add to that, I think you mentioned before that there's an issue with funding for the way science is done right now. But you also mentioned the child you were working with, the rare genetic disorder, sudden infant syndrome, something about, the science could show one thing, like that you could suddenly now save this infant's life. I think the story was, but so that law is passed based on that science without the understanding that even though you saved the infant's life, now that infant is living in an incapacitated state for the rest of that individual's life. So what is the cost and benefit of the science? Is that really something that's more becomes like a moral or a bigger issue than the hard science of it? Right. Do you want to just...
Yeah, just so I don't go personal, I'd actually like to just do a non-personal version of this with the viewpoint of cancer drugs. Okay, so right now, as a pharmacological company, can't use my words, excuse me. If you're in stage 3 trials, meaning that you are about to find out if you can sell your drug or not, and you come back with a p-value of, basically, if you come back with a number that says your drug wasn't valid, you get a 0.49, you're going to lose on average about $350 million. But if you can make that p-value go from 0.49 to 0.51, you're going to make $12 billion on average. So for a pharmaceutical company, it goes, do I want to lose $450 million? Or do I want to lose $12 billion? You know, if I gave you any kind of statistical analysis in your life on what you should do, and I said, on this hand, I'm going to empty out everything out of your bank account, and on this hand, I'm going to put $12 billion in there, you would figure out a way to make your life look like you were going to get that $12 billion, right? You would work that out. So when we look at cancer research, this is what's going on from the company's perspective, and that's not wrong whatsoever. So when the company comes out with this new cancer drug, I work with a lot of people that are in like stage 3s and 4s of cancer, okay? So this new drug comes out, and they don't realize that the pharmaceutical company is coming from that point of view. Not a bad thing. I'm not criticizing anyone, but that's where they're coming from, right? Well, when we look at what the stage 3 trial included, they got the healthiest individuals possible into their trial. So if you are this person who's not even healthy enough to be in the trial, and then you look at the trial and the trial says that, oh, we can add 2 months to your life, you could be tricked into thinking that, oh, that drug might be really good for you. Now, additionally, let's say that drug, you're going to get 2 months extra of life, but for the last 2 years of your life, you have to come in for 4 hours additionally every week. So you're going to lose those 2 months to come get the new drug, and you're going to lose feeling of your hands with a year left of your life. Well, then all of a sudden you're like, I don't know if I really want that drug. Well, guess what? We already have lobbyists in place. This happens all over the world. Like, this is a really big discussion right now of cancer drugs, where Britain will pay for certain things that we won't pay for, and we won't pay for certain things that Britain, vice versa. Because like, what it comes down to is that everyone has this idea that we need to extend life. Or I shouldn't say everyone, but there's a big crowd of people like extend life. And when it actually comes down to you as an individual, there might be all these other things that you might actually want to do instead of going and getting for this new treatment for the last 2 years of your life that takes away feeling in your hands, but allows you to live an extra 2 months in hospice while you're getting morphine every day. Now, again, I don't mean to be insensitive to people out there that are going through this right now. I do end of life care and stuff like that. I just mean to say is that I think in all those points I brought up, I think it became clear that the issue is much more convoluted than whether or not, if you have specific cancer, you should get this drug because it became approved. You know, I mean, this is if it's okay, can I comment on the COVID vaccine? I'm not going to give an opinion.
No, dude.
Not going to give an opinion. I rarely talk to anyone who is actually informed about their specific health in relation to the vaccine. Mm-hmm. I only talk with people who have opinions that they got from someone else. Mm-hmm. And one of the FDA advisors, MD Paul Comfort, can look this up online. This is exactly what he says. He's over the age of 65, and he got asked, he's like, are you going to get the vaccine? Now, he's on the FDA advisory panel for the COVID vaccine. He goes, no, I will not get the vaccine because we haven't done a stage 3 clinical trial yet. The stage 3 clinical trial is being done on the American public. That's what we're doing right now. You know, it's what's saving everybody right now, honestly. I just skip that. It's an amazing point in science that we got to do this. It's awesome. But he literally said, because he's a scientist, I'm going to wait until there's 3 million doses out at 6 months. He's like, if they come out and it has the same safety profile, then of course I'm getting it. But I will wait on the data. To me, that's a sensible answer. To me, at least, I can see that person thinking. Doesn't mean I agree. Doesn't mean I disagree. It just means I see thinking there. And that is where I think where there's this like disconnect sometimes where, in my opinion, science has become the new religion, where it's all of a sudden people come out and say, well, because one scientist said this, then I will agree with my opinion. Do you know your vitamin D levels? Do you know your HLA genetics? I mean, there's so many things I could talk about that I won't. But if you don't know your personal health markers, you know, if you're not measuring those, and then you think to yourself, oh, I can have an opinion about another thing I put in my body, I'd be like, well, it's an ignorant opinion. I say that with all the love of my heart.
So your personal constitution, your genetic disposition, your your physical life, your emotional life, your energetic life all makes up you, and even more so can make up who you are. And possibly how can one vaccination cover everyone, as somewhat assuming that everyone is just one person with this one constitution overall.
I think that's where all the conflict comes from, is that we look at everyone else as if we're the same person, and none of us are. We're all diverse. We're all different. There are reasons why we do things and reasons why we don't do things, and they're all valid.
Well, we're going to end it there. Thank you so much, Donnie, for joining us today. Chi Talks with Javi and Nona, and we are out of time. We've reached the top of the hour, and we want to say thank you, everyone, for tuning in to K-Mud Community Radio. And Nona, last words from you, and we'll hand it off to Dorothy. Thank you, Dorothy.
All I got to say, Donnie, is that we got to have you back to talk about this perineal system. But thanks, listeners. And thank you, Dorothy. It's been a wonderful conversation, always very, I would like to say, thought-provoking here.
And thanks for joining us today. To get in contact with us for any questions or comments, email talkingchi@gmail.com, talkingqi@gmail.com. Thank you and take care.